When Constantinople fell in 1453, the world believed the palace would drown in blood. An empire of 1,000 years burned to ash. And from the ruins, a 15-year-old princess was dragged from her hiding place. Everyone thought she would be executed or turned into a trophy of war. But Sultan Mehmed II, the man who shattered the walls and slaughtered thousands, did something no one dared to believe. He didn't kill her. He didn't free her either. He turned her into a witness, a living symbol of the conqueror's mercy, an act that completely changed the meaning of victory. And for centuries, historians have argued, was it mercy or a calculated act of power? If you want the truth, stay. Because when the ledgers close, the bones still speak. May 29th, 1453. Dawn over the Bosporus. The smoke of cannon fire rolled through the sky as the city that had once called itself the Queen of the World began to die. Inside the palace, marble walls trembled under the thunder of Mehmed's massive bombards. Statues cracked, crosses fell. The air reeked of gunpowder and fear. From a narrow corridor, Princess Theodora Paleologina, barely 15, watched servants run in silence. For her, the fall of Constantinople wasn't a date in history. It was the sound of boots on marble, the shattering of glass, the last breath of a world that had told her she was sacred. Her mother, Lady Euphraine, had already made her choice. She cut her daughter's hair, smeared her hands with soot, and wrapped her in coarse servant's clothes. In the chaos of empire, disguise was the only kind of prayer that still worked. "You must not look like a princess," she whispered, "because they will kill what you represent, not who you are." Outside, the walls groaned. 80,000 Ottoman soldiers were closing in on a city defended by 7,000 men. By sunrise, the unthinkable had happened. The Theodosian walls, once the pride of 1,000 years, were breached. The gates opened and the conquerors poured in. According to chroniclers, the noise of the invasion sounded like the cracking of the earth. Churches turned into prisons. Priests were cut down mid-prayer. Men were chained, women divided, children numbered. For 3 days, Islamic law allowed plunder, a divine receipt for victory. But Mehmed didn't wait 3 days. By the evening of the first, he entered the city on a white horse, stopped the killing, and rode through the burning streets in silence. Some said he wept. Others said he smiled. But one fact remained. His mercy came not from compassion, but from control. A city of corpses could not serve an emperor. In the ruins of the palace, soldiers found Theodora. Her disguise failed. Her speech, her hands, her eyes betrayed her. She was dragged before Mehmed himself. History says he studied her in silence before giving an order that stunned his generals. She would live untouched, protected by the state. That single command turned massacre into myth. Because in the theatre of power, even mercy has an audience. He was 21, barely a man, already a legend in the making. Short, thick-set, with eyes that burned through council meetings and prayers alike. When Sultan Mehmed II marched on Constantinople, he wasn't chasing territory, he was chasing eternity. To the courts of Europe, he was still the boy sultan. A prodigy perhaps, but untested. A child who had inherited an empire he didn't build, trying to play at Caesar. Even within his army, whispers spread. The Janissaries said he was too clever for war, too obsessed with books, too dangerous for faith. His own viziers feared him, not because of his cruelty, but because of his conviction. For Mehmed, the siege of Constantinople was not just a campaign. It was a statement to God, to history, and to his father's ghost. Murad Sulk, his father, had been a warrior, the kind who won loyalty through blood and exhaustion. Mehmed, by contrast, was born into strategy. He could quote Aristotle, translate Latin chronicles, and debate theology with scholars from Italy or Persia. But he was haunted by the way his father's soldiers used to mock him. He reads when he should fight. When Murad abdicated and left him the throne at 12, the Janissaries revolted within months. They refused to follow a child. Mehmed was forced to recall his father to crush their rebellion. That humiliation became his fuel. When he regained the throne at 19, his first act was vengeance, not on men, but on memory. He vowed to do what no sultan, no emperor, no Caesar had ever done: unite East and West under his rule, not through religion, through legacy. The dream was clear, but the path was suicidal. The Byzantine Empire, though crumbling, was still surrounded by walls said to be blessed by God. The Theodosian walls had resisted every invader for 1,000 years. The Pope himself declared them impenetrable. No army could bring them down, not even the Mongols. But Mehmed didn't believe in divine protection. He believed in engineering. In 1452, he built Rumeli Hizara, a fortress on the Bosporus, designed not just to choke Constantinople's trade, but to announce his intent. The age of faith would yield to the age of mathematics. He hired a Hungarian engineer named Orban, who offered him something unholy, a cannon so vast it could break miracles. 27 feet long, cast from molten bronze, firing stones heavier than men. Each cannonball was more than a weapon. It was a message. To Mehmed, the thunder of his bombardment was not chaos, it was liturgy. The sound of Islam and empire fused into a new gospel of power. Rome did not fall, he told his council. It awaits its true master. And yet, beneath that confidence, there was fear, a quiet, relentless fear of failure. 80,000 men depended on him. 200 ships waited for victory. The treasury was nearly empty. Food was running short. Spies whispered that the Venetians were preparing fleets to intercept Ottoman supply lines. Even the imams began to doubt. Mehmed refused to hear them. God does not test those he has not chosen, he said, though even his tone betrayed exhaustion. At night, his tent was silent, except for the scratching of his quill. Mehmed wrote letters to himself, manifestos of faith disguised as strategy. If I fail, one line read, I am not unworthy. I am unborn. His obsession wasn't with conquest, but with identity. Without Constantinople, he was just another sultan. With it, he would be Kaiser-i-Rum, Caesar of Rome. He studied not only military maps, but ancient rituals of power, Roman coronations, Byzantine hymns, the oaths of emperors. His scholars translated the legal codes of Justinian into Ottoman Turkish. When his vizier asked why, Mehmed replied, "Because to rule the city, I must speak its memory." It was this understanding, this terrifying empathy for empire, that made him unstoppable. The siege began in April 1453. The cannons roared for 57 days. The walls bled stone. Inside the city, priests carried icons through the streets. Outside, Mehmed prayed on the dirt, head bowed, whispering verses. But his prayers were not for salvation. They were for transformation. Each morning, he walked among his men. He spoke not as a king, but as a prophet of history. "You are not fighting for land," he told them. "You are fighting for time itself." And the soldiers believed him. They believed because he did. Still, the cost was unimaginable. Tens of thousands dead. Rivers of coin drained from the treasury. The capital of Christendom refused to break. Some of Mehmed's generals begged him to retreat, reminding him that no army had ever breached the Theodosian walls. "Let it stand," they said, "and God will grant us another victory elsewhere." Mehmed's answer was cold. "If I leave this city, I will not leave as Sultan." To him, failure was erasure. A life without legend was a kind of death. And so, he gambled everything. He moved his ships overland, a feat so audacious that it silenced both friend and foe. Overnight, his galleys appeared inside the Golden Horn, bypassing the city's sea chain, shocking the defenders. It was the act of a mind that refused to play by nature's rules. By late May, the siege had reached its breaking point. The defenders were starving. The cannons had opened wide wounds in the walls. The city that had once claimed to be eternal was now living minute to minute. On May 28th, Mehmed made one final offer: surrender, and every citizen could leave unharmed. The emperor refused. "To surrender the city," Constantine XI said, "is beyond my authority. We have chosen to die." That night, Constantinople prayed, and Mehmed, in his war tent, sat alone, not in triumph, not yet, but in something deeper: silence. He stared at his maps, at the city that represented everything he was and everything he feared. To conquer it meant victory, but to destroy it, to burn its churches, slaughter its nobles, erase its culture, that would make him no Caesar, only a barbarian. And that was the decision that haunted him. What would be the price of being remembered as civilized? Because Mehmed understood what few conquerors ever do, that power does not last through blood, but through meaning. And when he finally broke through the gates, he would have to decide which one he wanted more. The night before the end smelled of wax and fear. May 28th, 1453. The last night the bells of Hagia Sophia would ever ring for a Christian empire. Constantinople was dying, but it refused to die in silence. The streets flickered with torchlight as men, women, and children poured into the great cathedral. The priests carried icons older than the city itself, cracked paintings of Christ Pantocrator, the Virgin Theotokos, saints who had watched the empire rise and now watched it fall. Orthodox and Catholic, who had cursed each other for centuries, now prayed side by side. The quarrels of theology vanished before the certainty of death. Inside the cathedral, the golden mosaics shone like the last light of heaven. The Emperor Constantine XI wearing his imperial cloak, stood beside generals, senators, and beggars. Together, they received the Eucharist, one final, trembling unity. Chroniclers say the emperor wept, whispering, "Tonight we are all one." The city outside was no longer a city. It was a confession. Citizens nailed shut their doors, kissed their children's foreheads, and left their fates to God. The smell of burning oil drifted through the air as soldiers melted down bronze for makeshift weapons. Some sharpened swords, others prayed for miracles. Everyone knew, when dawn came, the earth itself would decide whether Rome would live or die. In the palace overlooking the Golden Horn, Princess Theodora Paleologina sat in the dark. The candles had burned down to stubs. She had never seen the city like this. Quiet, hollow, waiting. Her mother, Lady Euphraine, worked in silence, cutting her daughter's hair, staining her hands with soot. Theodora wanted to speak, but couldn't. How do you ask if you're about to die? Her mother's voice was low, steady. When they break through, you will not run. You will bow your head. You will look small. Do you understand? Theodora nodded. She had been raised to curtsy before ambassadors, to play the lute, to recite Homer, not to hide in storerooms or pray that soldiers would overlook her. But in that moment, she understood something she had never been taught in her gilded education. Survival is an act of obedience. Outside, drums thundered from the Ottoman camp. 80,000 soldiers. The sound rolled like a storm across the plain. From her balcony, Theodora could see the endless firelight stretching beyond the city walls. A sea of tents, spears, and crescent banners. Each flicker of flame marked one man sworn to destroy her home. Theodora's cousin, Emperor Constantine, prepared for battle. He had spent the day touring the ramparts, blessing soldiers, handing out bread. His words were calm, but his eyes were already far away. He knew no one would come to save them. The Venetian fleet had stayed in harbour. The Hungarians had stayed silent. The West had already buried Byzantium in its mind. As midnight passed, a strange stillness fell over the city. The wind dropped. Even the dogs stopped barking. Chronicler George Francis wrote that it was as if the air itself held its breath. In the Hagia Sophia, priests continued chanting through the night, voices rising and breaking, the sound of faith collapsing into echo. In the palace, Theodora's disguise was complete. Her golden hair lay in a pile on the floor. Her silken dress had been replaced by rough wool. Her mother smeared soot on her cheeks. "You are no longer a princess," she said. "You are a servant. You do not speak unless spoken to." It wasn't cruelty. It was the only strategy left. From the harbour came the sound of chains being dragged. The giant sea chain that guarded the Golden Horn was being tightened one last time. Men nailed icons to the gates, as if wood and paint could hold back cannon fire. And from the Ottoman camp came hymns of their own, verses from the Quran rising into the night. Two faiths singing to the same God, asking him to destroy the other. At around 2 a.m., the emperor sent a final message to the palace. All royal women and servants were to gather in the inner chambers. Theodora clutched her mother's hand as the distant rumble of cannons echoed through the dark. She thought of her tutors, her harp, the garden where she used to feed doves. All gone. The world was shrinking to the sound of drums. Then came the horns, the signal for the final assault. Witnesses said the first wave of Ottoman troops, the irregulars, the desperate and the poor, charged with screams that shattered the night. They were cut down by the defenders, bodies piling against the moat. But behind them came the second wave, disciplined Anatolian soldiers. Behind them, the elite janissaries, Mehmed's personal guard, silent, ruthless, and unyielding. From the palace, Theodora couldn't see the fighting, but she could hear it. The dull percussion of artillery, the rising chants of Allah Akbar, the faint, rhythmic roar of men dying. Each sound was a heartbeat of the empire collapsing. By dawn, the Theodosian walls, those ancient holy fortifications, had been breached. A forgotten side gate, the Kirke Porta, had been left unlocked. Ottoman soldiers surged through it like floodwater. Theodora's mother pressed her into a hidden storeroom behind barrels of oil. "Don't move," she whispered. "Don't speak, even if you hear me scream." And then she was gone. Theodora curled up in the dark, clutching her knees. She could smell smoke, hear shouts, feel the marble tremble. Boots pounded the corridors, doors splintered. A man shouted in Turkish, then another, then silence. Hours passed. When she finally dared to move, light was pouring through the cracks in the door. The air was thick with ash. The palace was no longer the world she knew. It was a tomb. She did not know that outside her cousin the emperor had died fighting at the walls, nor that Hagia Sophia had fallen, its golden dome echoing with prayers now spoken in Arabic. She did not know that the Sultan, the man who had sworn to destroy her world, was already riding through the city, silent, calculating. All she knew was this: the empire was gone, and her life now belonged to its conqueror. The first screams began at dawn. By the time the sun rose over the Bosporus, Constantinople, the city that had called itself eternal, was gone. The law was clear. According to Islamic tradition, any city taken by force was owed to its conquerors for 3 days, a divine compensation for the blood they shed. 3 days of pillage, 3 days of ownership, 3 days where faith and commerce became the same language. The soldiers did not hesitate. They poured through the broken gates like a tide of steel and smoke. The streets of Constantinople, once lined with marble columns, philosophers, and prayer, became an auction floor. Men were cut down where they stood. Women were dragged by the hair, their names erased and replaced with numbers. Children were pulled from basements and cellars, tagged by price and usefulness. In the great hippodrome, where emperors had once watched chariot races, Ottoman officers set up wooden tables. Clerks began to record what the sword had earned: age, appearance, strength, beauty, skill. Everything had value. A young man with good teeth might fetch 15 silver coins. A noble girl, 40. If injured, the price dropped by half. The empire was being reborn, but through an accountant's quill. Theodora could hear it all from her hiding place in the palace. The pounding boots, the foreign voices, the clatter of metal. At first, she prayed they would pass. But prayers are fragile things in a burning city. Soon, the door crashed open. 2 soldiers entered, faces black with soot, eyes hungry. One kicked over barrels of oil, another tore through curtains. When they found her, she didn't scream. She remembered her mother's words, "Bow your head, look small." They shouted something she couldn't understand, dragged her by the wrist through corridors that smelled of blood and smoke. When they saw her face, pale, composed, unmistakably noble, they paused. The shorter one muttered to the other. They didn't strike her. They didn't touch her. They simply dragged her into the courtyard, where hundreds of captives knelt under the open sky. Around them, the city burned. From the harbour came the sound of chains breaking, the great sea barrier torn apart to let the Ottoman fleet enter. From the Hagia Sophia came a different sound, not bells, but the low, melodic chant of Arabic prayer. The church that had crowned emperors for 1,000 years now echoed with the Adhan. Inside, thousands of people who had sought refuge were trapped. They had believed the sacred walls would save them. Instead, they became merchandise. Witnesses later wrote that Ottoman officers stood at the doors of the cathedral, counting those who emerged. A tall boy, strong, mark him. A girl of 15, fair-skinned, 40 silver. Priests were stripped of their robes, their crosses taken as trophies. Faith had become a ledger entry. Even the conquerors seemed uneasy. Some soldiers crossed themselves when they saw the mosaics, Christ's face shimmering in gold above their heads. But orders were orders. They tore down the icons, hammered silver frames into coins. And yet, amid this chaos, a strange silence fell over certain quarters of the city. Mehmed had ordered his elite guards, the Janissaries, to halt random slaughter and begin organization. His army moved from chaos to structure, turning pillage into procedure. Lists were made. Officers collected the most valuable captives to be presented to the Sultan. By noon, Theodora was among them. She was herded into the hippodrome with others. Scholars, nuns, musicians, artisans. Some wept. Others stared blankly, already hollow. Ottoman scribes recorded their details in ink. Each name was a transaction, each line a new form of slavery. Somewhere in the distance, the emperor's body was still being searched for among the dead. But the soldiers no longer cared who was emperor, priest, or peasant. All were property. And yet, in that moment, when the city's last citizens were catalogued like grain, something unexpected happened. The order came to stop. From the palace steps, a herald announced, "By decree of Sultan Mehmed Khan, the plundering shall end. Henceforth, all citizens are under the protection of the state." Shock rippled through the ranks. Some soldiers protested. This was their payment, their holy right. But the Janissaries obeyed. Within an hour, the killing slowed. The streets filled not with chaos, but with a new kind of silence. The silence of order imposed after madness. Mehmed rode through the city that afternoon on a white stallion. The sun glinted off his armor, the air still thick with ash. He said nothing. He looked not at the dead, but at the living. The kneeling prisoners, the children clutching their mothers, the clerks with their ledgers. Every face was a reminder that conquest was only the beginning. He dismounted at the Hagia Sophia. In front of his generals, he picked up a handful of dirt and poured it over his head, a gesture of humility before God. Then he entered the cathedral and declared it a mosque. The age of Byzantium ended not with a sword, but with a prayer. But Theodora, still kneeling in the hippodrome, didn't hear that prayer. She only heard the scratching of pens as scribes continued writing. Her age, her name, her features. She was now recorded, and that meant she belonged to someone. Yet destiny was about to interfere. When her name reached the Sultan's list, Theodora Paleologina, age 15, captured in the palace. It did not mark the end of her life. It marked the beginning of her transformation. Because in the eyes of Mehmed II, she was not just another captive. She was an opportunity to prove that mercy could be as powerful as the sword. When Sultan Mehmed II entered Constantinople, he did not run. He arrived, not as a barbarian, but as an emperor. At noon on May 29th, 1453, he rode through the Adrianople Gate on a white Arabian stallion, surrounded by his viziers and janissaries in gleaming armor. Smoke still curled from the rooftops, the air heavy with the iron scent of blood. The city was broken, but he made sure the moment looked divine. It was theater. Every gesture was deliberate. The posture of the horse, the rhythm of the march, the gleam of his turban's jeweled brooch. He moved through the ruins like a priest in procession, as if the destruction itself were a ritual of rebirth. Soldiers cheered, captives stared, and chroniclers wrote furiously. Mehmed was composing history in real time. When he reached the Hagia Sophia, he dismounted. For a long moment, he simply stood there, a young conqueror before the largest church in Christendom. His men expected desecration, fire, triumph. Instead, Mehmed bent down, scooped a handful of dirt, and poured it over his head, a gesture of humility before God. And then, quietly, he spoke. There is no God but God, and Muhammad is his prophet. Inside, thousands of captives knelt trembling. Priests still clutched icons, children huddled beneath columns. Mehmed walked across the marble floor, his boots echoing through centuries of prayer. He looked up at the golden dome, Christ Pantocrator staring down at him, and ordered the Imam to recite the Adhan, the Muslim call to prayer. The Church of Emperors became a mosque. The Empire of Christ became the empire of all. And with that act, Mehmed II achieved something no sword could. He transformed conquest into ceremony. His generals were stunned when he ordered the plundering to stop, after only one day. According to custom, his army had earned 3 full days of loot. But Mehmed ended it early. Enough, he said. A ruler inherits subjects, not corpses. It wasn't mercy. It was branding. He was crafting an image, not the destroyer of Rome, but its successor, the conqueror who could rebuild what others had ruined, the Caesar of the East. When the Grand Vizier protested that the men would be angry, Mehmed answered coldly, "They will obey. Let them be rich in order, not in chaos." Within hours, patrols moved through the streets, restoring order. Pillaged homes were sealed, soldiers punished for theft. Survivors, Greeks, Armenians, and Jews alike, were told to return to their houses. Messengers carried decrees through the markets. the Sultan guarantees protection to all who accept his rule. The transformation was almost alchemical. In a single day, the same man who had unleashed the apocalypse now presented himself as its savior. Witnesses described it as surreal. Smoke still rose from the city, corpses still littered the streets, and yet proclamations of peace echoed from every minaret. Mehmed walked among the ruins, calm, composed, radiating control. To the terrified citizens, he seemed like a divine judgment that had suddenly decided to spare them. But this was not compassion. It was politics of the highest order. Mehmed understood what every great empire builder had known. Violence creates power, but mercy stabilizes it. A city ruled by fear will revolt. A city ruled by debt, by the illusion of gratitude, will serve forever. And so, he began to legislate salvation. He summoned his scribes to draft new laws for the conquered territories. Churches would remain open under Islamic supervision. Greek priests could continue performing rites. Scholars, if they swore loyalty, would be exempt from enslavement. These were not acts of tolerance. They were infrastructure, policies to make the conquered useful. At that very moment, far from the public eye, the spoils of war were still being catalogued in the hippodrome. Ledgers filled with names, origins, and prices. Among them, Theodora Paleologina, aged 15. Her name stood out. A princess by birth, captured in the palace, yet still alive, a rare commodity. When her record reached the Sultan's personal list, Mehmed paused. "A child of the Paleologos?" he asked. "Bring her." His court fell silent. It was an unprecedented order. Conquered royalty were rarely shown mercy. The daughter of Byzantium's bloodline should have been enslaved or executed. But Mehmed saw something different. Opportunity. The next day, Theodora was brought before him. The scene was like theatre. The marble hall still stained with blood, the light filtering through shattered windows. Mehmed sat on a portable throne, the same one he had carried through the campaign. His armor glinted beneath his white kaftan, his turban crowned with a single sapphire. He looked not like a conqueror, but like a sculptor studying his creation. The guards pushed Theodora forward. Her disguise had long since failed. Her hands shook, but she refused to cry. Mehmed spoke in Greek. "You are of the Paleologos line?" "Yes," she whispered. "Your father?" "Dead." "And your faith?" "Unchanged." For a long moment, Mehmed said nothing. Then, turning to his vizier, he gave the command that would shock his court. "Release her. Give her shelter, a stipend, and protection. She shall live as a free woman." The chamber froze. The meaning was clear. This was no personal kindness. It was a statement. By sparing the blood of Byzantium, Mehmed crowned himself with its legitimacy. By showing mercy, he claimed not just the city, but its soul. The next morning, word spread across the empire. The Sultan had spared a Byzantine princess. The conqueror had shown mercy. The streets filled with whispers. In distant courts, Venice, Rome, Cairo, diplomats reinterpreted the message. Mehmed was not a barbarian. He was a ruler of civilization. That was exactly the story he wanted them to tell. Because theatrics win hearts faster than swords. And in the ashes of Constantinople, Mehmed had already begun writing his own gospel. One where mercy was the weapon, and history the audience. The throne room still smelled of smoke and blood. The marble floors were streaked with the footprints of soldiers and the red stains of conquest. In the high gallery, broken mosaics glimmered faintly in the light. Fragments of angels, wings shattered, eyes erased. Here, in the heart of a dead empire, Sultan Mehmed II staged his most important performance. Theodora Paleologina, 15 years old, was led before him. Her wrists were bruised from the ropes, her dress torn, her hair cropped unevenly. She tried to stand tall, but the sight before her stole her breath. The conqueror of her world sat not on a Byzantine throne, but on his own travelling seat, a simple wooden platform draped in white silk. Around him stood his viziers, janissary commanders, and scribes. For a long time, no one spoke. Theodora felt every pair of eyes weighing her, not as a person, but as a problem to solve. Finally, Mehmed looked up. His voice was calm, almost gentle. "You are the daughter of the Paleologos line?" "Yes," she whispered. "Your father?" "Dead. He died on the walls." "And your faith?" She hesitated, then met his gaze. "It remains the same." The Sultan studied her for a long moment. His advisors waited for the command they expected: enslavement or execution. That was custom. It was how power worked. But Mehmed did not move. He simply said, "Bring water." A janissary obeyed. The Sultan washed his hands, as if cleansing himself of what the city had forced him to do. Then he gave his order. "She will not be harmed. Provide her with clothing, food, and lodging in the district of Fanar. Her faith will not be touched. Let her live in safety under my protection." Silence filled the chamber. The viziers stared in disbelief. To them, it was madness. Sparing the bloodline of the fallen empire was not mercy. It was risk. But Mehmed saw what they didn't. He understood that conquest without narrative is just slaughter. To be Caesar, he needed witnesses. By sparing Theodora, he made her a symbol, a living seal of his new order. The fallen empire's bloodline would survive, but under his protection. She would no longer represent resistance, only legitimacy. It was the same lesson he had learned from the ruins of Rome. Even an empire needs continuity, even if it must steal it from the corpses of its enemies. Mehmed stood and walked toward her. His boots clicked softly against the marble. He stopped close enough that she could see the soot on his armor, the sweat on his brow, and the faint tremor of exhaustion in his hands. He was not a monster. He was something colder, a man performing morality for eternity. "You are not my slave," he said, "but my responsibility. The world must see that the House of Osman conquers not by blood alone." She wanted to speak, but no words came. She bowed her head instead. It was not gratitude. It was survival. When she was led away, Mehmed remained in the hall alone. He turned to look at the shattered mosaics, the faces of angels, half buried in ash. To his mind, they were no longer Christian images. They were emblems of eternity, waiting to be repurposed. He called for his scribe. "Send a decree," he said. "The people of this city are now my people. Christians, Jews, and Muslims alike. Any man who harms them without cause will answer to me." And with that, the conquest was officially over. The city of Constantinople no longer belonged to God or to the Caesars. It belonged to the law. But law, as Mehmed knew, could be written to sanctify anything. Theodora's name appeared days later in the imperial records. Protected person, stipend of 40 silver per season, no restrictions on worship. To the Ottomans, it was a bureaucratic note. To the conquered, it was propaganda. To history, it was a paradox. The mercy that proved his divinity, the cruelty that preserved his power. The following weeks transformed the city into an open-air construction site. Corpses were buried, churches reopened under new names, and the Sultan's decrees turned slaves into subjects overnight. But Theodora's story spread through whispers, the girl the Sultan spared. Mothers repeated it to calm their children. Priests whispered it in disbelief. And soon, what had begun as an act of control became something larger. Myth. Mehmed knew it. He cultivated it. Every act of governance became theatre. He allowed Greek scholars to reopen schools. He reinstated the Patriarch of the Orthodox Church, granting him authority over all Christians. And in every decision, he made sure to remind the city that its survival came not from faith, but from his mercy. He had rewritten the divine. To his subjects, he was no longer just Mehmed the Conqueror. He was Mehmed the Just. But to his enemies, he was something more dangerous. The man who had learned to weaponize compassion. Because for Mehmed, mercy was never forgiveness. It was ownership. He had spared Theodora not to save her, but to bind her name to his legacy, to make her life a mirror in which his greatness would be reflected. And it worked. For centuries, the story of the princess who lived would travel through both Christian and Muslim lands. Some saw it as proof of divine grace. Others saw it as evidence of manipulation. But all agreed on one thing. Mehmed had not just conquered a city, he had conquered its memory. To conquer is easy. To govern the conquered, that was Mehmed's true masterpiece. Within weeks of Constantinople's fall, the young Sultan began to reshape it, not as a Muslim city, not as a foreign capital, but as New Rome. He did not see himself as the destroyer of Byzantium. He saw himself as its inheritor. The first act of reconstruction was architectural. He ordered the rebuilding of markets, aqueducts, and homes. He summoned Greek and Armenian builders, engineers, and artisans to restore what his cannons had broken. A city without commerce, he said, is a corpse that cannot decay. The irony was brutal. The conqueror who had shattered the city's walls now paid its survivors to rebuild them. The second act was spiritual. Mehmed summoned Gennadios Scholarios, a scholar priest once exiled for opposing union with Rome. He offered him the position of Patriarch of Constantinople. Gennadios, stunned, refused at first. "How can I serve under the man who destroyed my city?" he asked. Mehmed smiled. "Because without me," he replied, "your faith would have no city at all." And with that, a Muslim ruler restored the Orthodox Church. He gave it legal status, tax exemptions, and authority over Christian subjects. The gesture baffled both Christians and Muslims. It was not tolerance, it was containment. Religion, to Mehmed, was not about salvation. It was an instrument of order. He didn't want faith to die. He wanted it to serve. Every mosque built in the city would stand beside a church. Every prayer would echo the city's divided soul, a warning and a promise. This empire would not erase the past, it would own it. In the district of Fanar, Theodora saw this transformation firsthand. She lived in a modest house near the shore, guarded but free to move within her quarter. Her stipend arrived each month, stamped with the seal of Mehmed's treasury. She was neither prisoner nor citizen. Something in between. Every morning, she watched the city shift. The same streets that had seen slaughter now buzzed with hammers and scaffolds. Merchants returned. Greek families reopened bakeries. The air that once reeked of fire now carried the scent of bread and lime. And yet, beneath that fragile peace, the city hummed with unease. Some whispered that Mehmed had spared Theodora because he planned to marry her, to unite the bloodlines of East and West, to become the true Caesar of Rome. Others said it was a calculated insult to keep her alive, as proof that the Byzantine line now bent under Ottoman mercy. The truth was simpler and crueler. Mehmed didn't need to marry her. He had already absorbed her world. One afternoon, she was summoned to the palace again. The newly renovated court of Topkapi was still under construction. Marble hauled from broken churches, columns stolen from basilicas. Theodora walked through hallways where Greek artisans painted Quranic calligraphy over Byzantine frescoes. History was being rewritten, layer by layer, pigment by pigment. When she entered the Sultan's study, Mehmed was surrounded by scrolls and maps. He greeted her not as a captive, but as a student. "You read Greek, yes?" She nodded cautiously. "Then you will read to me," he said. "The histories of Rome, the campaigns of Alexander, the chronicles of your emperors." That became her new role, not concubine, not servant, but voice of the dead world. Every evening, she read from the Byzantine texts, translating as Mehmed listened in silence. Sometimes he interrupted to ask about Latin etymology, or about how the Romans crowned their emperors. Sometimes he only stared at the parchment, as if trying to inhale the ghosts of history. He was not listening to her, he was listening to legacy. And she realized, with a chill, what he truly wanted, not to erase Byzantium, but to merge with it, to consume its language, its law, its memory, until no one could tell where one empire ended and another began. To the world outside, Mehmed styled himself Kaiser-i Rum, Caesar of Rome. He adopted Roman court rituals, preserved Byzantine administration, even minted coins bearing Greek inscriptions. The people whispered that he slept with a copy of Arrian's campaigns of Alexander beneath his pillow. The empire he built was not an Ottoman replacement. It was a resurrection, but one crafted from obedience and fear. Theodora read to him passages from ancient historians who praised clemency as the mark of great rulers. "Mercy," he told her one night, "is not the opposite of power, it is the perfection of it." She said nothing. She had learned by then that silence was safer than truth. Over time, her presence became symbolic, a living exhibit in the Sultan's theatre of empire. Foreign envoys were told, "Behold, the Byzantine princess whom His Majesty protects." They saw a girl preserved, not as an act of kindness, but as proof that even nobility kneels to the new order. Her name became myth, her survival propaganda. She was both a witness and a prisoner of narrative. And yet there were moments, rare and quiet, when Mehmed's mask slipped. Once, while she read aloud the account of Constantine the Great's vision of the cross, Mehmed murmured, "He saw light in the sky and thought it was God. I saw fire on the walls and knew it was only the world changing shape." Then he looked up. "Tell me, Theodora, is that heresy?" She didn't answer, because she understood what he meant. In his mind, God was history itself, and he had just proven he could rewrite it. By the winter of 1454, Constantinople no longer looked like the corpse of a city. It looked like an experiment. Mehmed II had done the unthinkable. He turned conquest into administration, devastation into design. But beneath the order lay a single obsession that guided every decision he made: legitimacy. He knew force could take a city, but only legitimacy could make it eternal. And legitimacy, he understood, is not given. It must be performed. The world was watching. Western Europe waited for him to collapse, to prove that no Muslim ruler could sustain the city of God. The Persians, his rivals to the east, called him a pretender, a boy drunk on Roman fantasies. Even within his court, whispers persisted that he had broken too many traditions, protected too many Christians, listened to too many philosophers. So, Mehmed decided to show them what kind of ruler he was, not through blood, but through spectacle. In the spring, he staged a triumphal procession through the city. Not the wild, drunken parades of ancient Rome, but something colder, controlled, mathematical. Citizens were ordered to stand along the rebuilt avenues as the Sultan rode by, flanked by soldiers carrying not captured slaves, but manuscripts. Greek texts, Latin chronicles, Bibles, and scrolls of Aristotle, all looted from churches and libraries, now paraded like trophies of the mind. When foreign envoys watched, they saw something terrifyingly new, an empire that worshipped knowledge as power. In his proclamations, Mehmed called himself Caesar of the two worlds. He declared that he ruled both the spiritual and the material, east and west, cross and crescent. He was not just the sword of Islam, he was its philosopher king. And yet, every proclamation was built on bones. Behind the image of enlightenment lay the quiet machinery of domination. Taxes were imposed on Christian communities under the name of protection. Greek nobles who accepted Ottoman titles were bound by oath to never rebuild their armies. Scholars who served the Sultan received gold, but also surveillance. Every act of generosity was recorded, audited, and repaid through obedience. Even Theodora's life became part of this structure. Her stipend wasn't charity. It was a political investment. She was invited and compelled to attend court banquets when foreign guests arrived. Her presence said what no speech could. Rome had surrendered, and its daughters now lived under Ottoman grace. Once, a Venetian ambassador bowed before her, asking if the rumors were true, that Mehmed planned to marry her to seal his claim to Rome. Theodora smiled faintly and said only, "He does not need a wife for that. He already owns the altar." The ambassador didn't understand. Mehmed did. He had discovered something profound, the power to reinterpret morality itself. In his empire, mercy was no longer weakness. It was proof of divine right. By sparing enemies, he became godlike, the arbiter of who lived and who died. His advisors documented every act of clemency in the royal chronicles. He pardoned the priests. He spared the scholars. He released the princess. Each line fed the myth of a sultan who could destroy the world but chose not to. It was a script, and Mehmed was directing it. Theodora, trapped within that story, began to see how perfect his system was. He did not need terror, he used gratitude. He did not need to erase Byzantium, he rewrote it until its symbols spoke his language. When she walked through the markets, she saw new coins minted with Greek inscriptions on one side and Arabic verses on the other. The message was unmistakable. This city is not conquered, it is translated. One night, Mehmed invited her again, this time not to read, but to debate. "What do your people say of me now?" he asked. "They say you've made yourself Caesar," she replied, "that you rule through mercy, not faith." He smiled. "And they are wrong. I do not rule through mercy. I rule through memory." He rose from his seat and pointed to the horizon, where the domes of the city glowed beneath the moonlight. "Every ruler before me tried to destroy what came before. That is why they were forgotten. But I let the past live, so it will never stop whispering my name." It was not arrogance. It was strategy. Because Mehmed knew that centuries later, historians would look at the ruins and see continuity, not conquest. They would say he preserved civilization, and they would forget that preservation was just another word for control. Theodora realized then that his mercy had never been about her survival. It was about his immortality. Her freedom was not freedom. It was evidence. A living footnote proving that the Sultan could turn captivity into civilization. But something in her, the small, defiant ember of the world that had died, refused to extinguish. Late at night, when the city was quiet, she began copying old Byzantine hymns in secret. She translated them into Greek and Latin, hiding them among the Sultan's scrolls. They spoke of loss, of exile, of a faith surviving under empire. She knew Mehmed might never find them. She also knew history would. Because even in his empire of order and memory, she had learned the same truth he had. The conqueror writes the story, but the conquered decide how long it is remembered. By 1456, the smoke of conquest had settled into marble dust. Constantinople had a new rhythm, the rhythm of empire breathing again. Minarets rose beside church domes. Traders shouted in a dozen languages. And in the shadow of this reborn city lived the girl history refused to erase. Theodora Paleologina had become a rumor with a heartbeat. To the Greek families rebuilding their homes, she was a miracle, the princess who lived. To Ottoman courtiers, she was an exhibit, proof of their sultan's mercy. To Mehmed himself, she was a mirror, a reflection of everything he had destroyed and claimed. Her existence was both gift and trap. She was free to walk through the Fanar district, to visit markets, to speak to priests. But her life was curated. Every visitor who saw her was meant to report what they saw. A Christian girl living safely under Ottoman law. Her home was both sanctuary and surveillance, and she played her role with quiet perfection. Each time she bowed before a visiting diplomat, each time she accepted her stipend in silence, She preserved the illusion Mehmed needed most, that mercy had triumphed over vengeance. But inside, something else was happening. Theodora was becoming what all survivors of conquest become: invisible, not dead, not alive, a ghost, walking through history, unheard but observing everything. The empire that spared her also erased her. Her name appeared in tax registers, in one decree about property rights, and in a single Ottoman payroll ledger listing: protected Christian, stipend, 40 silver coins. Then, nothing. Yet, her absence was not silence. Around her, Constantinople transformed into Istanbul. The city of marble saints and emperors became a labyrinth of calligraphy and prayer. Churches were converted, libraries rebuilt. Scholars from Persia and Italy arrived to study under Mehmed's patronage. He hosted debates between Christian monks and Muslim jurists about Aristotle, creation, and fate. He wanted to prove that faith itself could be conquered. Theodora sometimes attended these discussions, veiled and unnoticed among the audience. She listened to men argue whether mercy was a divine gift or a political tool. She never spoke, because she already knew the answer. She was the answer. One night, an elderly Greek scholar approached her after one of these debates. "My lady," he whispered, "they say you live by his grace." She looked at him and replied, "No, I live by his need." That was the truth no scribe would ever write. Mehmed spared her not to honor Byzantium, but to use it. Every breath she took reminded his subjects that their conqueror could afford generosity, because no one could threaten him. By then, rumors spread that she would be sent away, either married to a loyal Christian noble in the Peloponnese or cloistered in a convent. Neither rumor frightened her. What frightened her was the thought that her name would vanish before she did. So, she began to write. Late at night, by the faint light of an oil lamp, she copied fragments of memory. Not chronicles of battle or power, but the small, human ruins of empire. The smell of wax in the Hagia Sophia before it fell. The sound of a priest's voice breaking mid-prayer. The trembling hands of her mother cutting her hair. She wrote not for vengeance, but for balance. If Mehmed's chronicles were written to justify power, hers were written to remind the dead they still had witnesses. Years passed. She watched the city evolve into the heart of something new. An empire richer, larger, more orderly than Byzantium had ever been. But for all its strength, it was fragile, in the same way her family had been, too proud to admit its fear of time. She saw that fear in Mehmed himself. The once youthful conqueror grew restless. He built palaces, funded scholars, conquered more lands, yet seemed pursued by silence. Some nights, when the wind carried the faint echo of church bells from distant monasteries, he would order the call to prayer to begin early, as if trying to drown history itself. Their paths crossed rarely after those early years, but whenever she was summoned, she noticed his eyes had changed. The fire of ambition had dimmed into something colder, calculation mixed with fatigue. In one of their last meetings, Mehmed asked, "Do you hate me?" She hesitated. "No, Majesty. History will do that for me." He laughed, but it was not laughter of victory. It was recognition. He understood that empires may rule the living, but they never rule how they're remembered. After 1456, her name disappears from Ottoman records. Some say she was allowed to leave for the Peloponnese. Others claim she joined a convent near the Sea of Marmara. No grave bears her name. But centuries later, in Ottoman archival documents found by Turkish historians, a small note remained. Payment issued. Theodora, daughter of Paleologos, for residence and provisions, final. It was dated the same year the Sultan began his new campaign against Wallachia. History ends her life with a line of ink, a transaction. But even in that, there is defiance. Because through her, Mehmed's empire achieved what he wanted most, legitimacy. And through him, she achieved what no captive was supposed to, memory. Two names, bound by conquest, haunting each other across centuries. He turned mercy into a monument. She turned survival into resistance. And together, they proved the oldest truth of power. Empires never end. They only change languages. Decades passed. The city that had once burned under the weight of cannons became the crown jewel of a new world. Constantinople, now Istanbul, was no longer the wound of Europe, but its mirror. And yet, every stone of that city whispered the same paradox. The Ottoman Empire didn't destroy Byzantium, it digested it. Everywhere you looked, the ghosts of Rome were re-employed. The columns of pagan temples now held up mosques. Byzantine manuscripts became teaching texts in Islamic madrasas. Even the imperial laws of Justinian were translated, annotated, and absorbed into Ottoman jurisprudence. Mehmed had conquered more than land. He had conquered continuity. To rule forever, he realized, an empire must not erase its predecessors. It must consume them until they sound like praise. That was the genius of Mehmed II. He did not outlaw the Christian calendar, he regulated it. He did not burn the churches, he taxed them. He did not silence the Byzantine scholars, he gave them salaries. And every gesture of tolerance was a calculation. Because mercy, institutionalized, becomes obedience. Theodora's small house in Fanar remained untouched for years after her disappearance. Locals began to call it the House of the Witness. Some said her spirit protected the neighborhood. Others said the Sultan kept it standing as a reminder, a relic of his most famous act of grace. By the time Mehmed died in 1481, his empire stretched from the Balkans to the Euphrates. He had built more cities than he had destroyed. But his greatness came at a price he never admitted. His identity no longer belonged to him. It belonged to the idea of Mehmed the Conqueror, the myth he had written into being. His body was buried in Istanbul, near the mosque that bore his name. Inside, an inscription reads, "He took by the sword and ruled by the pen." But even in death, the question lingered. What ruled him? Faith, ambition, or the ghost of the empire he could not stop imitating? Because the irony of Mehmed's life is this. In trying to become Caesar, he also became Byzantium's last heir. His empire mirrored the very one he'd overthrown. Centralized power, codified bureaucracy, divine kingship, sacred law. It was Rome reborn in another language. And that, perhaps, was his greatest fear. That conquest had not freed him from the past, but chained him to it forever. Historians centuries later would see the pattern clearly. Every empire that inherits another begins as a revolution and ends as a translation. Rome became Constantinople. Constantinople became Istanbul. And the language of domination stayed the same. Only the script changed. In the archives of Topkapi Palace, one document still survives. Brittle parchment, Ottoman script in the margins, and Greek notes beneath. It's a copy of a decree from 1454 guaranteeing protection for certain noblewomen of the former empire. Among them, a name faint but legible, Theodora Paleologina. Next to it, written in Mehmed's own hand, a marginal note. Mercy is not weakness, it is inheritance. That sentence, 7 words, is his entire philosophy. And in that single thought lies the tragedy of all conquerors. They believe mercy redeems their cruelty, when in truth, it only preserves it. For Theodora, that preservation became her revenge. She disappeared from the world, but not from its story. Her silence became the proof that survival itself could be subversive. Because what is history, if not a duel between the victor's records and the victim's memory? In that duel, both Mehmed and Theodora won, and both lost. He built an empire to be remembered. She became the memory he couldn't erase. 5 centuries later, when archaeologists uncovered the Ottoman payrolls and palace decrees, her name returned, faint, partial, but real. And with it, a whisper beneath the dust. He spared me to prove himself just. I lived so history would not forget. The bones of the city still speak that language. Every prayer rising from Hagia Sophia, now mosque, now museum, now mosque again, carries both their ghosts, the conqueror who wanted eternity and the girl who learned how to haunt it. And so the story of Mehmed and Theodora did not end with conquest. It ended where all empires do, in the unseen silence between triumph and remembrance. Because when the ledgers close, the numbers fade, but the names still whisper. History remembers Mehmed II as the conqueror, but few understand that his greatest conquest was not the city of Constantinople. It was the idea of conquest itself. For thousands of years, kings had ruled by fear. Mehmed ruled by mercy. But his mercy was not kindness. It was strategy. He realized early what most rulers never do. Brutality ends at the sword's edge, but mercy endures in the mind. It cannot be resisted, only reciprocated. The executioner silences rebellion, but the merciful king makes rebellion unthinkable. That was his genius, to turn benevolence into a mechanism of control. When he spared Theodora, the act echoed across continents. Chroniclers in Europe were stunned. How could the man who slaughtered thousands also show such restraint? Some called him enlightened, others monstrous in sophistication. But for Mehmed, mercy was not moral. It was mathematical. A dead enemy cannot serve. A living one becomes a symbol. He studied the politics of Rome and Persia, the laws of Alexander and Caesar. Each empire had risen through violence and died through vengeance. So, he rewired the equation. He transformed conquest into administration, cruelty into continuity. That was why he kept Theodora alive, not because he admired her, but because she completed the portrait of legitimacy. She was the living bridge between two civilizations. Her presence in his empire said to the world, "Rome has not fallen, it has evolved under my hand." this was not mercy. It was metaphysics of power. He understood that to truly rule the conquered, you must make them complicit in your survival. And the surest way to do that is not through chains, but through gratitude. Every act of forgiveness became a contract. Every pardon, a transaction. By releasing captives, he bound them to him forever. By protecting churches, he redefined himself as their patron. It was domination disguised as deliverance. Even centuries later, the psychological effect lingered. Ottoman law preserved Byzantine rituals. Greek patriarchs held office under sultans. The empire wore tolerance like armor, proof to Europe that it was civilized, proof to its subjects that rebellion was sacrilege. Theodora's survival was the prototype of this empire, a parable of control through compassion. She was not merely a person, she was a policy. And through her story, Mehmed achieved what no emperor before him had. He turned moral contradiction into political strength. He proved that mercy could do what terror never could, make power feel inevitable. But there was a price. To wield mercy as a weapon, one must abandon empathy. The moment compassion becomes calculation, it ceases to be human. Mehmed's genius was his ability to appear humane while staying perfectly detached. But that detachment also cursed him. In his later years, those close to him described a ruler haunted by silence, a man surrounded by monuments, yet unsure which voice was his own. His scholars debated philosophy, his architects built wonders, his armies expanded his reach, and still he could not sleep. He had conquered the world's greatest city, but lost the ability to believe in his own virtue. Some said he began to see Theodora's ghost, not her face, but her absence. The quiet proof that his greatest triumph had also been his greatest lie. Because mercy, when used as currency, always accrues debt. And every empire that builds its glory on moral contradiction must one day pay interest. Centuries later, when historians dug through the ruins, they found Mehmed's empire preserved not by faith or fear, but by the very illusion he had engineered. That power could be justified if it looked merciful, and that illusion still rules the world today. Modern empires, like his, parade their compassion as conquest, bringing order, civilization, protection. But the logic is the same. Rule through mercy, and you will never need to show your chains. That is Mehmed's true legacy, not the fall of Constantinople, but the invention of a new kind of empire, one that kills with kindness and conquers through care. Theodora's story is not a relic, it is prophecy. Because the greatest danger in history is not cruelty, it is the ruler who makes cruelty look like compassion. By the time Sultan Mehmed II's heart stopped in 1481, the empire he built already stood on a paradox. It was vast, rich, educated, and hollow. Every marble column of his new Rome carried a quiet hypocrisy. Mercy had been weaponized, history had been rebranded, and conquest had been moralized. The Ottomans inherited the world, but at the price of believing their own myth. After his death, the empire continued his ritual of control through compassion. Successors issued decrees of tolerance, established protection taxes, and preserved churches in the name of harmony. But beneath those words ran Mehmed's formula, the same cold logic that justified Theodora's survival. Rule through kindness, and no one will call it domination. Preserve the conquered, and they will help build your empire. Make history your hostage, and it will never testify against you. Yet time has a cruel talent. It keeps receipts. 5 centuries later, archaeologists would uncover Ottoman ledgers in the Topkapi archives. Meticulous records of every transaction, every stipend, every act of mercy. Between the lists of grain, soldiers, and silver, human lives were recorded like inventory. Among them, Theodora, daughter of Paleologos, protected person, paid in full. Paid in full. A life reduced to an entry line, closed out like a business expense. That phrase, paid in full, was the true end of Byzantium. Not fire, not blood, bookkeeping. It was how empires turned tragedy into balance sheets. Theodora's story is not the tale of a rescued princess. It's the record of how mercy itself became a form of conquest. She was spared not to live, but to validate. She survived not to speak, but to symbolize. And yet, through that manipulation, she found her quiet revenge. Because history, unlike ledgers, never fully closes. Somewhere in the margins of Mehmed's empire, her memory remained fragile but persistent. Her name resurfaced in Greek songs, whispered in convents, preserved in fragments of poetry attributed to anonymous nuns. One fragment survives. He took my city, not my breath. He kept my body, not my faith. I live in the silence he fears. In that line lies the answer to the big question that began this story. Was Mehmed's mercy genuine compassion or cold calculation? The truth is cruelly symmetrical. It was both. Because every act of conquest that claims to civilize also requires compassion to disguise its violence. Every empire, from Rome to London to modern powers today, repeats Mehmed's logic. If we preserve what we destroy, we have the right to rule it. That is the philosophy of eternal empire. Theodora's story endures not because she survived, but because she revealed what survival means under power. To live as proof of someone else's virtue. And so the Sultan became immortal, not through his monuments, but through the paradox he left behind. And she, the forgotten princess, became the whisper that unravels that paradox. Because in the end, history does not belong to conquerors or victims. It belongs to those who understand both. Today, Hagia Sophia still stands, a cathedral, a mosque, a museum, a mirror. Each transformation speaks the same unbroken language of power. Control the symbols, and you control the story. But listen closely, and you'll hear another sound beneath the prayers, a faint echo, older than empire, softer than forgiveness. When the ledgers close, the bones still speak. Completed.